How's it going? You're very welcome, Jo-Michael Scheibe. We're here speaking to you. It's morning for you. You're having your coffee. It's evening for us. We're having another cup of tea. Keep us going. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Indeed,
so we're
my
here
pleasure.
to speak to you as part of our new choral series. We've got some really exciting questions, some conversational topics which I know will be of interest to a lot of our listeners all across the world. And so I'll hand it over to Michael.
Yeah, so just for our listeners out there, to give you a brief introduction, most people in America will know who you are, Dr. Scheibe, or Doc, as most people call you. So for everyone out there who's listening to us, Dr. Scheibe is the chair of the Thornton School of Music Department of Choral and Sacred Music at the University of Southern California. He's been an active member of the ACDA, American Choral Directors Association, and has served as national president, chair of the past President's Council, national president-elect, Western Division, National Repertoire and Standards Chairperson for Community Colleges. His bio is really long and he told me not to read out the entire thing, so I will minimize how much I do. He's performed at numerous ACDAs, most recent the 2015 conference in Salt Lake City. He is a champion of contemporary music. He commissions composers and has commissioned hundreds of composers throughout his lifetime. Most notably, well, there's many most notables, but one of the ones that's most famous is Eric Whitacre, and that's where I first came across Dr. Scheibe's name. It was on the side of a piece of music I had called Luke's Arumque back in 2007, I think it was. He's collaborated with Luciano Pavarotti, Elton John, the Rolling Stones, and prepared choruses for international conductors like Helmut Rilling, Michael Tilson Thomas, Sir Colin Davies. He's recorded for Naxos, etc. He regularly goes around America doing clinicians as a clinician, helping out universities, community choirs, high schools, etc. A wealth of knowledge and a Goliath in the field of choral music in America. So, Dr. Scheibe, you're super welcome here.
Thank you.
So the first time I saw you work, I heard your choir was actually in Thornton School of Music. I was visiting Michael in LA and I sat in for one rehearsal. It was, I think, like a 3 p.m. rehearsal or something. And I was just in at the back of the room, and it was amazing to get that sort of insight, because I'd heard so much from Michael about your work and what you were doing with all your students. And I think that was around the same time we had attended ACDA. Which was my second time attending, and for me going over to a huge festival like that, massive choral festival, which is basically what it is, it's just amazing. It's mind-blowing to think of the extent of it. But for our international listeners, people who aren't American, people who maybe don't know what the ACDA is, could you explain what ACDA is?
It's a professional organization run by a board of 5 members called the Executive Council. We have at least 11, 12 employees at the national office, which is in the center of the U.S., Oklahoma City. It's been around probably the first ACDA conference that I attended was as a student and as a singer in the first, what was the ACDA and the Music Educators Association at the time were meeting together kind of to get ACDA off the ground. And the first one I was in 1970. It was in, that was in Kansas City. And it was it became a regular biennial convention. I would call it a choral geeks heaven. If there's a good way to describe it. It's we're about 25,000 members across the United States and around the world. We teach everything from elementary school through collegiate professional choirs. We also, as an organization, support choral initiatives, such as a commissioning series that we have, which is called the Brock Commission, which every year has a commission of an American composer, although not always American. And we do what we call a biennial convention every 2 years, and an annual convention by regions. We have 6 regions. We used to have 7. We've taken two of those regions together in the middle of the United States, combined them to be physically more healthy. And it's really quite an amazing organization. We publish a journal, we do festivals, we have projects, we fund special projects, we have sessions for middle school teachers, what we call the 6th through 8th grade level. There's elementary workshops. And there's what we call nonprofit organizations involved, what we call children's choirs that are run as a nonprofit, a 501c3. We operate on a every other year, probably on a $2 million budget that funds our conferences and then funds partially what's going on in the national office. And we're there to support the art form, what we call the first art. It's an incredible organization, and it's grown immensely. So it's
that's amazing. One of the big
it
things
is
that
an
struck me
amazing
was
thing.
just what you were saying there about how extensive its reach is and how you're working with children's schools, with middle schools, with high schools, singers of all levels, because you have the top professional groups performing at ACDA as well.
Right.
And that's one of the most amazing things. You could walk into a room and you see a group of 8-year-olds performing, and then you walk into the next room and it's college students performing jazz, and then you walk into the next one, it's a sacred choir from Finland. It's really absolutely unbelievable.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that we also, with the international choirs that we bring in, they're usually highly vetted, and they're wonderful organizations, whether it's somebody that's from like South Korea, where they have phenomenal city choirs, or whether it's from Sweden, Norway in there, or whether it's from South Africa or Kenya or someplace. It is an amazing experience. And for those of us that live in rural parts of the United States, it gives us a chance to hear choirs that we aspire to, and to hear new sounds and new music. As I said, it really,
if you're a high school teacher and you're living in your little bubble and you're in rural America, and that can be compared to rural England or rural Ireland, you're doing an amazing job in your little community, and you're trying to inspire the kids. And if those kids get a chance to go to something like this, or even you as a conductor get a chance to go there, the amount of learning that can take place when you visit ACDA it's just phenomenal. The networking, meeting other people like yourself, the reading classes, the education classes, it's really unique.
Just full of geeks.
Yeah, it's full of geeks, yeah.
Yeah, they're geeks. It's like me. And there's real body of knowledge that happens, and just discussions of all aspects, not just about music, but about interpersonal relationship with your choir, and how to rehearse better, and what may be causing intonation issues, and trying to affect change. I liken it to the growth of really American choral music. We're such a small world now. We're reduced by the technology that we have. I mean, I'm talking to you from my home in Southern California, and here you are, at the Institute, the Irish Institute of Music and Song. And I think of that would not have been possible to make a phone call at the beginning of my career. Would have taken an act of God to call somebody across, and a budget to do so. So the internet has been one of the great wonders, as well as things like YouTube, and the fact that we can now get a CD online. We don't have to wait for it to come in a packaged form, and it comes with its challenges as well. I used to have to sit down and play through music to choose music. Today, if I'm lazy, I can go to the internet and I can just look at a score maybe, but most likely, oh, I like that piece, I'm going to do it. Well, do you have a low D in your bass section? No, but I didn't realize that was a low D in the bass section.
Yeah.
So now you bought 50 copies of something and it may not work, you know. So it's really a wonderful place to be at this point in my career.
And that technology is something we're going to discuss a bit later,
Sure.
given the current COVID-19 climate. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, one of the things we'd love to discuss with you, because I know it's a passion of yours, and that's choral sound. It's the sound choir, it's the timbres, the type of music they do, it's that all-encompassing use of the voice. And you mentioned there with ACDA that it's made up of different regions of America. And one of the things we forget often from Europe is we say, oh, Americans. And Americans do the same thing with us. They go, oh, you're from Ireland? Oh, you Europeans. And as an Irish person, you're like, well, we definitely don't feel like Europeans in Ireland, because we're an island. We do feel like Europeans.
Yeah,
but we don't
part
feel
of Europe.
Yeah, like we're an island off an island off mainland Europe. So, you know, when Europe was having this, you know, renaissance and France had all its money. Hey, I'm Mary, how you doing?
Hello.
Dr. Scheibe's wife just popped her head in there. Yeah.
She misses you, Michael.
She misses abusing me. She's no student.
That's true.
So Europe had all this money, you know, like France was a place that had tons of money for a long time, right the way back to the medieval times. And they were producing all this really high art, and, you know, Ireland was still a third world country really until recently. Until the 1900s, really, Ireland was a third world country. So we often don't feel like Europeans, but when we look at America, we say, oh, Americans. But you forget, you know, America is as large as Europe. And even though they all speak the same language, they definitely don't often share the same culture. And oftentimes the value systems across America, which we see politically, but we also see in other ways, can be quite different. So like what's important to a New York person is definitely not the same as what's important to someone from Arizona or someone from Louisiana to Oregon. So with that, in the choral world, this is what we're concerned about here, there's different sounds and there's histories behind why certain areas of America produce different sounds. So we'd love to kind of get into what's your ideal sound, and then also maybe discuss the certain sounds that come across the entire country of America.
Wow, that's a big topic, because it is something that I think is identifiable with a certain conductor more so than maybe a certain school. Mm-hmm. I do believe that maybe back 1960s, 1950s, there were certain centers where choral sound evolved based on concepts that were in the conductor's ear. Or in the conductor's mind, or perhaps to be able to be heard over an orchestra, or to be sung in a sanctuary, in a sacred house of worship. And I think all of that, and Michael knows part of this is from that historical standpoint, there were centers of choral sound, but they were really driven by certain personalities. We have the Lutheran schools up there in Minnesota, and, you know, that goes through part of that area up there that at one point was Olaf Christiansen and his founders. And then it has morphed. I think Olaf had his sound. His son, who was at Concordia, had his sound, and they were not alike. Mm-hmm. And if we watch any of those schools, they evolve. And why do they evolve? I believe that there's a sense of science that drives some of this, and a sense of vocal health. The more we learn about certain things, the more we grow, if we're willing to, if we are willing to listen to the specialists in voice science, in listening to other sounds. I think I'm driven by a sense of really knowing what it is I want to hear in the score. And then having studied a lot of different sounds. Certainly I grew up with a particular sound at my high school, and then finally college, and then I grew as I aged in the process. And there have been periods in my life where, as a conductor, I think I've done some disservice to the singers I was working with, trying to make them sound older than they truly were, by forcing them into a sound that wasn't truly there for them at that point in their lives. And I think it's important for us as conductors to realize that age-appropriate singing is age-appropriate singing. So in other words, where are they in a maturation process? Should a high school choir or a youth choir sound like a professional choir? No, they shouldn't. There's certain parameters of where the voice is at a certain point in the maturation. And as we know, some singers mature at later dates than others, and somewhat by fach, or by stage of the maturation. For me, I think as I look at things, I look at it being that I want a person to sing from birth to death, and I want them to sing healthy. And I want them, despite what things people may say, I want them to enjoy the experience, because it's that community we build within that ensemble. How important it is for them to feel that they are a member of something that is very special, and not just musically special, but the camaraderie that's built within an ensemble. My journey, as I said, has taken some turns, and sometimes it's because somebody has taken me and brought me down to my knees and slapped me across the face and said, "What is that you're doing to that sound? Why are you doing that?" Vocally healthy sound is paramount. That means that I know what the dynamic level is, the max of that group, and I don't hold them back too soft, and I don't let them go to their point of screaming or squirting blood, as I say sometimes.
Pretty graphic.
And it's also determined by what the constraints are of the group. If I have 180 singers, like the Westminster Choir College Symphonic Choir, because I'm singing with a New York Phil, it's going to be a different sound than if I have 12 singers in a high school madrigal group. The literature as well will determine what that sound should be. I remember one ACDA convention that I attended back, it's probably been 25, 30 years ago. And I remember hearing Brahms being sung. And it was all these wonderful American choirs with notable reputations for their interpretation of Brahms. And it was one after the other, and it was loud, and it had a lot of vibrato, and it was just, just everybody's hair was flying. The hair that I don't have was flying in this direction. But then Stuttgart Kammerchor came up with Friedrich Berlioz. And it was like, for me, I say this often, that my mind and my eyes and my ears just had a whole different interpretation of Brahms, because the way that Berlioz did that. There was not a lot of the American vibrato, that the obscured pitch. You still heard pitch, you still heard line, you had concept of tone, you had the framework of Brahms as I know Brahms today. Now, that was 40 years ago. I'm almost 70. I think that there's a big change that occurs the longer you live as a conductor. You accept other sounds more. You embrace other sounds more. You're not as regulated as to what the perfect sound is, because there is no perfect sound. Sure. It is what I hear in my mind's ear that really tells me, is that healthy? Is it age appropriate? Am I doing things that are going to engage them to use good breath source to make sure that there's full connection all the way above? Am I using techniques in my rehearsal, in my gesture, that allow them to be free and to sing fully, but embodying good technique? Being at USC is a very interesting dynamic because there are two functions of our voice program, of our choral and voice program. We see that there's importance in both in voice science. But when I'm teaching a solo singer alone, I'm looking at that solo singer being a soloist on stage. I have one-on-one interaction. I'm able to make choices that are going to be good for them as a solo singer. If I apply that to the same singers in the choir across the board with the same technique, I will not get the same result. And therefore, if I'm teaching somebody to go into opera, I want to have one sound. If I'm teaching somebody to be choral and to be flexible, then I have to be able to sing with Elton John, and I have to be able to sing musical theater, and I may need to do a jazz ballad, and I may need to do Brahms, and I may need to do Eric Whitacre, and I may need to do Josquin. So those all require flexibility. That's a different style. You know, not every singer, solo singer, can do Mahler or Strauss. And not every singer can do Verdi, but some can do early music. They can do Monteverdi or Mozart, and they're really good at Bellini. You know, there's all of these functions of the way we choose singer. We have that Fach idea, that idea of a solo singer having a certain color. In a choir, we have to meld certain things together. We have to select the singers for a season based upon the people in front of us. I can't pick up the phone, call an agent, and say, I'm doing Mahler this year. I need a soprano to sing, you know, this or that, or a tenor. So I have to be different in my choices. Spinning that around, I think American choral sound has changed. I think it has changed very much so by the influence of especially what's going on in Europe. I think the first paramount person I can think of as a choral conductor was Erickson with the Radio Sweden Choir. Certainly a huge change. Here were these, 32 operatic singers who made this sound, and they could sing Poulenc, Vigor Uman, or they could sing William Byrd, or they could sing Morley, or they could sing Brahms, and it all changed. Again, the vibrato rate was much more along what we call the Richard Miller thing, not too wide, not too fast, but an even tone, which I think is what we want to hear so that the voice is free. And I believe that in many ways, Americans are listening more to the scientists. We want to know that we're not doing damage. Do no harm is the first thing that I believe we want in medicine as well as we want in singing. Do no harm. Make sure what you're doing embraces the singer in front of you. If I'm doing church choir and I've got one tenor and 4 sopranos and an alto and a bass, obviously I should not be doing 8-part choral music. It's that wiseness of who are the people in the room that you're teaching, that you're conducting.
Yeah, and on that, I think it might be an interesting question, maybe for you to explain the term you used there for anyone who maybe hasn't heard it before, Fach, about the voice, just to know your singer's voice.
Well, I think as we age, our voices do certain things. You can force a voice to be a round peg in a square hole. In other words, that the voice is this, and you want to force them to do this.
We know.
But I think by,
We know a few singers like that.
Yeah. So my sense is that knowing if you've got a voice, it's a large instrument, let's say a true mezzo that is could go to the Met and sing, putting her into an ensemble, having her sing soprano one, and having her sing Thomas Tallis is probably not a wise thing, and you're going to hear that voice above all others. So I think it's important to know what the voice type is. So, you know, you have a Helden tenor for Wagner. You have a lyric tenor. You have all of these various styles. We can categorize them. And if you look up the word F-A-C-H, Fach, voice Fach, you can see all of the various types. But some of them don't settle until they're in their late 20s and 30s. And knowing that when you're working with those voices, when they're 17, 18 or below, you got to be careful how you deal with them, because you don't do no harm. Again, you want to make sure you're doing well with them. I have a mezzo right now, Lydia Brown, who's a fabulous mezzo, and she's a freshman. I have to be careful with that voice, because I have her singing second. She's a color voice. In other words, she will color the entire second alto section. In there's a master's student, Shelby, who is from Texas, and she also helps color that section. But I don't need dueling mezzos in the choir, so I will then add some buffers in there. And it's also driven a little bit by ego, I suppose, in certain voice types. There's tenors are notoriously known for their sense of, this is my voice, and having taught for this many years, you're dealing with embracing who they are as a singer and embracing who their voice is, and not trying to separate them from what's important to them, but also showing them a different path. Sometimes it's done with a 2x4 in the rehearsal, but sometimes it has to be done by putting them in the right voice pipe, or having them re-landscape the score. So maybe they move down to first tenor to help the first tenors out, and maybe the second tenors move down a little bit to the baritone line. Looking at the musical score as a composition as a way to help them find the best way to path of singing. I believe very much so that there are some schools of sound. If I'm a professional conductor, I have a choir, I can certainly buy my singers to the sound I want. We see that with professional groups, whether that's a virtuoso singers in New York, or whether that's Seraphic Fire in Miami, or whether that's Conspirare, or that's a Phoenix Chorale, or it's the singers in Minnesota. There are certain singers that are paid to be part of that ensemble, or LA Master Chorale, our 100-voice professional ensemble here in Los Angeles, where you can select from a very large environment the best of the best. And those singers don't need much coaching. You have to be careful in how you select them, but they sight read the spots off a page. They have wonderful ears. They're terrific musicians. That's one type of singer. They have all different sounds. When I hear Craig Hella Johnson's group sing, it doesn't matter if it's contemporary music or whether it's pop music or it's an arrangement by Craig. It is really fabulous singing. Whether I hear Seraphic Fire and they're doing early music, or they're doing something contemporary. Again, it changes and it's modeled. If it's Atlanta Symphony, it's another sound. At the university levels, there are more sounds. There's a Westminster sound, which I still believe is.
We just lost you there for a second. Westminster sound, which you still believe. I wonder, is the internet gone? Oh, you're back.
Back. I think you're muted there.
Turn on you're muted.
I got it.
Great. Good
Got
stuff.
it.
You're back.
The Westminster sound.
The Westminster sound is really quite something, and it has some. Under Jo, it had some very different sound components.
Under Jo, can you give us the surname?
Jo
of the
Miller.
person? Jo Miller.
Jo Miller is his name. He is now going to be the new director of choral studies at Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. He just took a new position.
Great.
So much in the same way that when Joe Flummerfelt left and Jo Miller came in, there's now going to be another transition.
And they'll be called Jo
These
as well.
things happen in the period of any ensemble. You're frozen on my screen. It's a beautiful smile, Michael.
So are we still frozen, are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll fix itself.
Yeah, we can still see and hear you. Okay.
Okay, good.
I wanted to ask you there. I've so many questions from that Dr. Scheibe. Absolutely enormous amount of questions. One of the things you mentioned there was this older sound, and it would be great for the conductors, with our listeners who are conductors, whether they're high school or university conductors. What are the things to try and look out for when listening for an older sound with young singers, and what are the types of things they might be able to do to help allow those singers to explore their own voice that is age appropriate?
I would say there's a wonderful book by Stephen Smith, who I espouse a lot. It's about speech-based singing. It's about forward resonance. When I started my teaching, I always talked about lifted soft palate and raising the eyebrows if you had bad pitch, or smile in the sound.
Yeah.
All of those things that are known really to be panaceas for a much deeper rooted problem. We know that through voice science, I mean, if you take a breath through your nostrils and you just do that, the palate moves slightly. If I say to my to my 8th grade choir or 10th grade choir, my 15-year-old, my 11-year-old, to raise the soft palate, they're going to overdo it. And what happens is the tongue goes up, the sound goes back, and the tuning is exactly. The tuning, Michael, is just like that. We kind of go,
Yeah, the song.
and usually the head goes like this.
Because if the tongue goes
And it
back,
took,
the larynx
Yeah.
has no choice but to go down.
But to go
because the
down.
larynx is connected to the tongue. So by moving
Right.
it back, you're forcing the larynx into a lower position than maybe is natural.
right. And when you say raise the eyebrows, there's facial tension. Or smile when you sing. I taught with a wonderful diva. She was a voice chair for a while at the school I was teaching at. And she always had her sopranos smile inside. There was always an inward smile.
Inside.
Well, you needed one soprano to 500 singers, and she could cut through. It was like a trumpet that went through the sound because it was all like this. And so there are some things we can watch for. With younger choirs, I think breath engagement is really key. And we all talk about how to breathe, and we don't teach it. So I think that's one of the things that we really need to do as a fundamental of every part of every starting ensemble is how do I breathe? How do I do that? What should I look for? As a judge or an adjudicator or jury member, I note oft times that we'll see singers breathe together, but they breathe with what I would say is clavicular breathing, like this. So they'll end a phrase and all of a sudden you'll see the choir pump up like so. And I think that's a very dangerous spot to be, because it means that this is all high intense. And so if we can have them think more about abdominal breathing and release this way, you can't move the diaphragm voluntary.
That's a great point. You said abdominal breathing, not diaphragmatic breathing, which is really
No, I don't
because
want to use diaphragmatic breathing. I think that's a real critical element for us, is to use terminology that is scientifically based so that it doesn't get confused. It's, I want you to sing like a color. Those things, they really have no meaning. If you want to shape color with the sound, really the best ways are through the articulators and here. If I want to go E, sorry, E, I can change color just by what I'm doing with the lips. The tongue is in the same spot. The mouth shape is in the same spot. There really isn't a lot. Things like dropping the jaw to create more space. Those are all issues that are taught by older technology or older teachers. We are a product of our own voice teachers. Those that taught us, we need to continue to monitor so that we can learn more about voice science, so that we're looking at Ingo Tietze, and we're looking at Brenda Smith, and we're looking at Lynn Helding and others who are looking at the science, doing the research, looking at what we can do with imagery today in terms of the scientific imagery that can be done.
Images that you can look up on YouTube, where you can have a singer singing through an aria, and you can see the tongue, you can see the soft palate, you can see all these micro movements that are happening to produce the sound. It's absolutely fascinating. If anyone hasn't seen that, pop onto YouTube and type in singer MRI. It's really incredible.
And if you do that, also listen to the sounds that they make when they sing, and the tongue position changes. It's a very interesting thing to see what happens when they take their tongue and it's not right, and you hear the intonation because there's no ring to the sound. It sounds flat. And so if you listen very carefully, which is, the conductor's ear can tell you more about what to do, both in your technique and in your conducting, than anything else. Because if you hear something, you're responsible for it.
Yeah.
You are responsible one way by what you've said, by what your expectations are, what you've heard, or what your gesture is doing. This past year, I've taken a real hard look at my conducting. I find the best singing that we do is when I'm out of the way.
Well, it takes a very confident and secure conductor to actually be able to step away from their choir and trust them, because it almost feels like we never have enough time to get everything the way we want it, and then by the time it's there, we do the program once and then we've moved on to another program. Just the way, particularly in college settings, the way it's set up. And we don't live with the music for a couple of years. Like, I was listening to the ACDA performance of the Aeolians on YouTube there very recently, and a couple of the songs they did, and that was a phenomenal performance. Really, really incredible artistically.
Absolutely.
In terms of the vocal production, it was just phenomenal, start to finish. One of the best performances I've ever seen in my life.
I would agree.
Yeah, incredible. But I was looking back then to some other videos, and I think they had some of those songs in their repertoire for at least a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. And you listen back to the other videos, and while the other videos were still excellent, you could see that by the time they got to ACDA, then they had lived with that music. The muscle memory was there. I imagine the singers knew it so well. Even if their voices were at 50%, the muscle memory was there to carry them through and still deliver a really exceptional performance.
I would agree with you. I do think that some of my strongest performances have been when I have chosen something to repeat it in a second year. I would say that in terms of, for all of us, that the use of a piece more than 1 year with the same ensemble, whether that's a church choir, a community choir, or a college or high school, or even an elementary choir, is a good thing. And that they grow through through not only muscle memory, but when things are right, they feel it. And that allows them to relax as a singer and just sing.
Yeah,
And
get to
that
stage as
freedom.
well.
Yeah.
I'm a true believer that in order to communicate with our audience, it can make a big difference to get rid of the music. And some people have different views on this. When we get rid of this folder that we have in front of us, we open ourselves up to being able to directly connect with the audience member. Likewise, if we move our conductor then out of the way, there's nothing blocking our connection. We can have a direct link. We can look into people's eyes in the audience. We can just literally say the words directly at them, and that can have a profound impact. But you don't get there when you're tearing through music, trying to basically just go through programs.
Well, and I think that's one of the issues for collegiate directors in general. And I tend, as Michael knows, to overprogram. I tend to probably want to put too much music in front of the ensemble and not pull enough away when I discover that it's too much.
70 pieces in a semester. Remember one year?
A lot of work.
One year we did a Beethoven, we did a Considering Matthew Shepard, we did a tour, and we did probably about 30 other pieces, plus then a Christmas program as well. But I have to say, as someone who's in the choir and as a conductor, it was fantastic because I got to gobble up, a phenomenal amount of music.
Well, and I think the commitment of that choir was really quite special. And I think the topic of Matthew Shepard, for instance, was one that opened up a great dialogue. And it's something I don't often get a chance to allow in my hurry to get to the music making, to correct all the things that have to be corrected in a choral rehearsal. I don't leave enough time to talk about the music itself, to go into the text.
That's a great segue, because one of the questions we wanted to ask you was the role of music in society and music's ability to change people's perceptions about things, but also to just connect with people emotionally. And you mentioned Considering Matthew Shepard there. Would you be able to tell our listeners what that is, the story behind it, and maybe the impact it had on you as a human?
Back about 25 years ago, there was a young gay man who was a student in Wyoming, and he was picked up at a bar and brutally beaten and left for dead, tied to a fence. That event, what we call hate crime in the States, ended up being a very large event in the life of the US, and especially of those that are in the LGBTQ community. When it happened, Craig Hella Johnson was the conductor of Chanticleer. He was the music director of Chanticleer, a wonderful male ensemble tenor bass choir that we have in the United States, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And Craig was deeply affected by this particular hate crime. Matthew died, and over the course of, 18 years, it kind of festered, it kind of ruminated, and in Craig Hella Johnson's mind. And in 2017, he brought Conspirare to perform it at the Western Division ACDA conference. And there were people who walked out on it because it was a gay thematic work, and it was a storytelling. It truly was a story told from beginning to end, and told with love and compassion and with community, and not just LGBT community. And I was very moved. I sat and wept at the end of the performance at this church with this choir, with this man who I'd admired for his creativity, for his compositional voice, for his just his gentle demeanor in the way he makes music. And I knew at that point that I had to get him to USC. And with the help of a couple of really brilliant teaching assistants, I ended up getting a grant for, I think, $38,000, which was the largest grant ever given by the provost for something like this. And I involved the LGBT office, and I involved the Office of Religious Life at the university, and we began work on this piece. And I remember it was at St. Matthew's Episcopal, and we were in a room, and I put on the recording, and we talked about it. I played it for the chamber singers. The recording had just come out. And that began a journey for the choir. I've had 2 or 3 of those moments in my teaching career where, maybe more, but where something affected the students in such a way as to change the students internally and externally, to bind them as a community, to bring us to a point of discussion that even when Craig arrived, I mean, we had just done the Beethoven Ninth on Good Friday, and the day after Easter, in comes Craig, and the Sunday after Easter, we're doing Considering Matthew Shepard fully staged. Memorized. We'd spent, I don't know how many weekends and how many hours in rehearsal. And it was an event that I think, along with the B minor with Rilling that I did my second year at USC, were probably 2 of the highlights of my time as a conductor at SC. And I think the students were changed, but watching Craig talk about the work and watching the students be open to it, and watching my students who were either unsure of their sexuality or unsure of if they could talk to others about this topic, was a moment that music's powerful voice and the text and the storyline really brought focus to this group of 34 individuals in such a way that I never expected it to. I was really concerned about taking it, but I knew I had to take the journey. Not as much for my students, as much, maybe more so for the community we teach in. Academic institutions need to be taking up the tough subjects. We need to have that freedom to do so. The project was huge. It involved a community of students and a community of singers, and then a production team. And it ended up costing over $55,000 when all was said and done. But the moments with Craig Hella Johnson in his talks with the students, in his quiet talks, that, along with the moment where we're sitting at the Villa Dyskussus in Krakow, Poland, after having visited Auschwitz, and we do an abbreviated version of Considering Matthew Shepard in front of an audience of maybe 12. Didn't matter. There was something in that room because of the experience of seeing Auschwitz and walking into the Villa Dyskussus, and we hadn't touched Matthew Shepard since April 8th. We had not sung a bar of it, of that hour and 40-minute work. And we took that, we put it at Villa Discuses, we sang it, and at the end, we wept again as an ensemble. That's the power of music. I'm going to take you back to the 1980s when I was teaching at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. I decided to do a program on the Holocaust. I had these pieces in my mind, and I wanted to deal with that topic, and I wanted to deal with it because my father had been in the German army and my mother had been in Poland. They were all part of the Hitler Jugend. And I needed absolution because of my parents. And I put together this program. And we had the All-State, which is the top choir in Arizona, top students. We put together a 200-voice All-State choir and a 150-voice, 150-member band and a 125-member orchestra. And I fought to say, no, we must be the ending. We have to end the program for the high schoolers. There's going to be 1,500 students. I want them to be left with this. And I fought the band director and I fought the orchestral director, and he was in my chair at the time. And I said, we have to do this. And I remember that we began with a piece that there are several pieces I remember. One was Tama by Alfred Janssens, which is a piece which has no text. Uses a snare drum and organ, and it uses choir in 12 parts, and it's basically a tone poem for choir, organ, piano, and snare and some other instruments. And the Tama is the title, but it's a theme. And the only image I could achieve when working through the score was the shooting of prisoners in the war, going the Jews into the trenches. And we did a piece by a folk song that had been arranged or set by Nick Strimple, my current colleague, called Rosnoff Clock. And we spun that with a piece by Sid Rabinovich, a Canadian composer, from his suite called Prayer Before Sleep. And we put this whole thing together, and I used dance, two dancers under a parachute. So the movement was this sound. And I remember we ended the concert, that All-State concert, and there was utter silence. And I mean utter silence. Nobody moved. These are high school kids. These are 14 to 17-year-olds. And my kids, you know, we walked off stage, they were in tears. That's the power of what we do. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it leaves a mark on those students, and it leaves a mark on the audience. I remember we finished the B minor with Rilling, and at the very end, he held his baton up, his little baton, you know, like this, like a pencil, and he held it up there, and it had to be 1.5 minutes. And dropped it finally, and the place erupted. Those are the moments of music. Those are the moments where music transcends text, transcends notes and rhythms and dynamics and releases and entrances and all of that stuff, but it makes something very special in life. And those are the things that we want our students to remember. And that's why we want people to come back to our concerts, but more importantly, why we want people to sing with us, so that we can inspire and engage them. Absolutely. Text is important, Michael. It's something I never have enough time to deal with. And I get my you know, we get faculty evaluations every year, and, you know, it says the same thing, and I hear it, and I read it, and I apply it as much as I can to make changes, but I'm old, and I'm slow to change. But it's not because I don't want to be dealing with all these issues. It's because I lack the time to do everything well. And I choose my battles. And those battles are get enough repertoire in front of those singers so that they have an experience which embraces at least one of them in some way. So, boy, we've gone from sound to music to society to...
That's something that's a really powerful point. I mean, as musicians ourselves and all our team of teachers and performers, those moments that you're talking about, they're what have brought us on this path, brought us together to perform together, or to just appreciate music together, or to talk about the power of music and the power of art. I mean, this is something that does change people's lives, and it's something that has a deep, deep impact way down somewhere in your head or in your history, whatever it is, in your personality, that just, it's almost like a craving, that you're craving it for the rest of your life. But it's also extremely rewarding as well, and this is what keeps us coming back, and it's what keeps people practicing hours upon hours, days upon days, years upon years. And as educators ourselves now, it's something that we are trying to pass on, and I'm sure that it's something you've been doing, you know, every day of your career, and it's something we're doing now, and trying to find interesting ways. And I suppose in a time like this where everything, the normal has been interrupted, and during this pandemic we are all trying to cope with it in our own ways, but music has been a really powerful way.
And I think that's a great segue onto just right now what we're dealing with at the moment. Like, how do we as musicians create the environment to allow our students or our singers or our players to feel that level of connection? Because, you know, it's a connection to each other, but it's also a connection to something that we can't put words on. And yes, recordings can get us that way sometimes. Sometimes you hear a recording and it can take you away, but those real life experiences, working on something together as a group for a year or for whatever amount of time, you know, going through the hardships of extra rehearsals and all that kind of stuff. We've lost that at the moment, and we're trying to find innovative ways. And I know at the university, all the classes have been cancelled. We're trying to do whatever we can to try and give our students some type of experience. How has that affected you as a conductor and USC?
Well, the pandemic in the U.S. was and is a very difficult thing for all artists. It's currently in the city of Los Angeles, just as a statistic, there are less than 45% of the public that's employed. We have 55% unemployment currently. Wow. I find I have taken a different approach with this. I asked the students, my students, for them to write 3 questions to a conductor that you'd like to have answered. You know, what are 3 things you would like to say to not just me, but to any conductor you work with that you would like me to deal with? And those formed my foundational points for the way I looked at 7 sessions of the choir rehearsals. So I didn't tell them anything about it. I just said, your first meeting is Wednesday, April 1st. I have a guest in. He's a composer conductor. Love to have you here. Please join us. It was Eric Whitacre. It got to them, so because like, I've known Eric since, yeah. I mean, they turned on and here comes Eric, and really, you know, so, and I thought about that because Eric is a great spokesperson for somebody who is morphed in his career. Young composer, growing up, wanted to be a rock star, you know, all of these things. So it's this path that he took. And it was because I've known Eric and his ex-wife for a long time. I've known him, probably I'd say at least 30 years or more.
And as I mentioned earlier, you commissioned a lot of his early, really, really famous works. Like I heard your name first by reading Luke's Urumque as part of the Jo-Michael Scheibe's Scheibe Choral Series.
Yeah. I've been involved because I tried to champion young composers. I want to make sure that we're not just singing dead white men's music, but that we're singing living composers' music. I think there's a cup in my office that says support living artists. It's a coffee cup I have there. I think the key here has been that I chose based upon the various topics that were important to my students and that were constant themes. So yesterday we had James Jordan talking about the Great Reset. So what happens after the pandemic? How do we go back to the classroom? This morning I opened up one of the newspapers and I read that Cal State Fullerton, the large state institution in Orange County, will not open up it will open up online in the fall. It will not open up in live person. That is already a very difficult thing for any of us to read, to hear that we may not be online. We'll be online again for another period of time. This pandemic has been very troubling to be a part of. But I chose others. I chose Josh Pahlke, who's a person who talks about inclusion in the classroom, LGBT discussion. Coming in on Wednesday is Rollo Dilworth, who's assistant dean and composer at Temple University, and he's going to talk about cultural appropriation. How can a white guy do African American music? How can a white guy do Irish music? What are the limitations, and how do we bring honor to the music without crossing a line?
And that's like for choral music, which I think probably out of the art forms out there is one of the ones that this is one of the biggest issues for, because we sing in different languages. We do music that's so stylized. We often hear, well, in Ireland, spirituals are really, really popular just for the exact same reasons that they're popular in America. Quite often for the same wrong reasons that they're popular in America. They're popular in Ireland. End of the program, we'll do a nice loud spiritual, and we don't.
And everybody claps and stands up. Yes.
Yeah, everyone can. We don't always look into it. And the same with Irish music. Like we often hear, people think Irish music is hi-de diddly diddly hi-de diddly hi, and it isn't. Well, some of it is, but most of it has a lot more substance than this hi-de diddly diddly. In fact, there's a piece. I can't remember who's the composer. It was in a book called Choirland, and I think his commission literally goes hi-de diddly diddly hi-de diddly hi-de diddly. But that's a fascinating topic. I'd love to be sitting in on that one. Yeah.
Well, you're more than welcome to join us. It's probably at the middle of the night for you, but you're always up anyways, Michael. It's not a problem.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, and so we brought in Dale Trombor. Dale is a composer, female composer, and she did a topic called Staying Composed, Questions and Answers. And it talks about a role of female composing and being aware of that. Josh Pahlke talked about the trans composers and supporting them. So we've had this, I had Corey Reed, who's a former grad, who's sang in Chamber Singers with me, who's a member of Chanticleer, talking about Road Warrior. So every one of these topics comes out of something that came out of these suggestions. And yes, we'll do one virtual choir thing because I need to do something. But we don't have the latency of, I know.
We've been hearing there's different tags going around, and we discussed this actually on a recent podcast, which I don't think has gone out yet. But this idea of virtual choir, like, what is choir? And for me personally, I think it's very, very hard to call it a choir because of what choir is. community,
Yeah.
people coming together, sharing an experience, you know, at the same time. And I think when you do virtual choir, you're on your own singing into it, and someone else brings you together, but you're not connected. They're bringing you together on a screen. So there's a phrase that's going around called social distance sing. I think it's brilliant. Because it's social distance.
I need to write that one down.
It's fantastic. So I think that's more true to what it is. It's a social distance sing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that, to use the word choir, and not to be protective over words, but I think to call it what it is, which is you singing on your own in the room to a track.
But I think this has been very informative and sort of illuminating as to what it is that we're all trying to do every day when we're teaching music, when we're singing music, when we're performing, when we're writing. Like, sometimes it takes something drastic just to take us out of our normality and to work out what were we doing in the first place, so that when, like, I like that term you said, the great reset, whenever that we go back to normal.
I don't think we're going to go back to normal.
Exactly, yeah. The normal is going to be new, and I think that idea of choir or singing or music in general being a physical thing, as in I was actually listening to the songwriter James Taylor, and he was speaking about what music is, and this was before it was a video from a few years ago, and he was talking about music as physics and music as something that happens in the air between people within a space. And it's a connection, obviously, between the performer and the artist, the performer and the audience, but it's also something that happens physically, and that's why it has a physical impact on the listener and on the performer and on the singer. So this trying to create a substitute for that is digital, that isn't physical, and that is, you know, it's sort of something new. It's different in itself.
It's different, yeah.
Well, if I think, I'm thinking back on this year, and I'm looking to the last time my choir performed on stage. And that happened to be on February 29th, because we had finished a big recording project and a concert on the weekend prior, and turn around and we have another concert, 2 concerts. And I think back on how we ended that program, and how I felt there was this group of singers and the audience, we were all engaged. It was an audience of, the last one was community colleges and the first one was high school that day. And it was a wonderful experience. And then I went to ACDA and I watched several performances. One was a new work with Eric Whitacre wrote, which embraced the death of Tony Silvestri's wife from cancer.
And Tony Silvestri, for everyone listening, is pretty much Eric Whitacre's go-to poet for all of the texts almost he uses. He uses E. Cummings as well and a few others, but he has a very close connection, a friendship, personal connection with Silvestri.
Well, Tony was a high school teacher in Southern California, close by to where Eric was. He was a history teacher, I believe, or English teacher. I don't remember exactly. Tony lives in Lawrence, Kansas now. After his wife died, he moved to Lawrence, Kansas, and his father-in-law moved to Lawrence, Kansas to be there to help the kids with the family grow up. But the second piece that was on the program was by Jake Runestad, a contemporary American composer, young composer. And it was a piece that was written in memory of John Byam and his wife Mary's loss of a set of twins in pregnancy. And it was a very emotional, so this whole conference, you felt was based on some emotional connection from conductor to singer to audience. I think when we have this time back with our ensemble, I'll treat my ensemble probably in a different way. It'll have this mindset of empathy, of knowing that we journey on this life very short time, You know, it's just a very short, brief moment. It's a speck in time. And to make an impact on those students, they don't have to all love what you do. What they have to do is love what they do, what their participation is in that ensemble, what the connection is in the fabric of that music making. There's a term that James used yesterday that I found really interesting. It's Fujimura, and it's a Japanese term that talks about broken pottery.
Oh yeah.
And you take the broken pottery and you reassemble it. And what do you use to reassemble it? Gold.
Gold, yeah, wabi sabi. Is wabi sabi involved? Yeah, where they use gold and it cracks, and then it
yes,
seems
exactly.
more beautiful. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what I think we can look at this. We are broken because we don't have that one-on-one connection. No, I'd rather hear a choir sing a little bit out of tune, which is horrible for me to say, than to be listening to somebody who has a choir up on virtual that has been auto-tuned, has been clipped, everything's perfect, everything's done. That's not music making. I tried to take a piece that we're using to do this virtual thing, and I tried to conduct myself conducting the piece, and I realized that my sense of motion today is different than my sense of motion at that point. There's moments where I take more time or less time. It's not calculated.
And it also changes in the room you're in. You know, you're hearing the sound.
It changes.
Everything, it's so in flux. If you go into a cathedral, you know, you'll take it a bit slower, and at the ends of phrases, you'll let the sound reverberate towards the room or around the room, and those natural slight changes you don't get necessarily.
You can't if you're conducting in the Salzburg Dome Kirche, the one with 7.5 seconds of reverb, your tempos change. If you're singing in a dry space, it's going to change. But each one has to have some amount of emotional connectedness with the people in front of us. We sang in Poland, outside of Krakow in this church, where we were at the end of a communion service. I think it was a confirmation service, Catholic confirmation service. And it's packed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get all my singers up there? And we've sat here for an hour and a half through this service. What can we do to, you know, and yet lovely setting, wonderful concert, so much good music making. Michael, isn't that where you conducted as well?
Yeah, there's a video. I haven't really posted it. I haven't posted it on Facebook yet. It's actually, choir sound amazing. It's a really,
squeezed great in as we were.
Yeah, the choir sounded great, but like you can see in the video, I'm conducting away, and I didn't get any other videos of me conducting the USC Chamber Singers. That was the only one I got on that trip, and I was very privileged to be able to do that. But it's so funny because in the video, there's like this little girl going around with a white dress on, and she's like sliding in next to her mother, and we're singing this piece about like autumn leaves, Canarbic by Vielo Tormes, and it's about, it's about the woods going on fire. And this little girl like snuggling up to her parents.
But those are the memories that you have. And those are the reasons we do the things we do. It's why we pick the music we do. We want to have connection. Some connections will come later in life. Some music we do, we don't understand at the moment we do them. But we honor the poet, you know, that's the thing we do have over those people that play instruments, you know. We have text. It's that other layer that we have. It's a bane to our existence to align all the consonants and all the vowels and have everything perfect so the tuning is there, but it's also the thing that brings us the soul and the heart to music, and it connects us with our audience because we have that added dimension of being able to have great poetry, whether that's, you know, by Rilke, or, you know, it's Pablo Neruda, or whether it's, you know, whomever it is, Craig Hella Johnson, or it's from Matthew Shepard's mom. All of those things are there. So it's a pretty incredible thing we do. We're lucky. And I cannot tell you that I miss my ensemble more than they'll ever know. Because that connection and the fear in my eyes that some person's going to say, well, you can just do virtual choir recordings.
For the year.
That fear of not having that interconnectiveness. I can teach choral development. I can teach choral conducting. I can do private lessons. I can do all of that. What I can't do is I can't make music. And that's what the pandemic has taught me. And although I'm at the age where I could retire, it's why I haven't retired, is because I can't leave that art form. And I cannot imagine sitting at home and doing nothing like this for the last 5 weeks. And to think that I'm going to be doing this in the fall is a very scary thought. And I don't know that that's going to happen, but certainly looking forward, if one school is already pulling it, we're all going to be rethinking how we teach and what we do. So,
Dr. Scheibe, it's been absolutely inspirational. Thank you so much for coming on. We didn't even get through, I think we got through about 3 of the questions that we had planned to ask you.
I rambled, I'm sorry.
No, but absolutely, listen, so honest and so open. It's been really, really fantastic. Thank you so much, because, you know, can we get you back again maybe in a little while?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Anytime.
We could be speaking a lot more, and even just your point on, you know, time goes in an instant, and we've missed out already on a lot of music making opportunities. So it's definitely already making me more aware and looking forward to the next time I do get to make music. So, yeah, it's good to have this reflection. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, and I wish you both safety, good health, continuing good health for you and your families, and hoping to see you in March next year, maybe.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll hope so. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks
Look
very
forward
much.
to the next
Dr.
time.
Scheibe.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
And then stop. Good
Okay,
stuff.
so we're going to hit stop record
So
here.
hit stop record on your GarageBand, Doc.
My GarageBand. Hold on. GarageBand preferences.
Hit the stop button, the square.
It's not there. Wait a minute. Here it is. The
Hit the
square.
circle again.